Story number 1, Bad Door. When I was a kid in Asheville, North Carolina, my uncle took my dad and I to see a crazy house he was trying to sell. He was a realtor and my dad was a contractor, so they would often work together. Now about this house. Firstly, it was made entirely of cinder blocks, but it looked very upscale. Someone had bet the original owner that they couldn't build a fancy house out of cinder blocks. He did it to prove them wrong. Crazy, right? The original owner had apparently gone to prison after he finished the house. Something about tax fraud or embezzlement. His wife had been able to keep the home and claimed that a demon had been responsible for her husband's imprisonment. She had gone as far to claim she had seen it and that it lived in the house with them. She even had a painting made of it and left it hanging in the front entrance. If that isn't weird enough, in the basement, there's a fake jail cell, supposedly built for a getting out of prison party when her husband was paroled. But that's not even the worst part. Under the basement stairs, there's a door leading to a strange closet. When I went to open this door, I had a horrible sense of dread. I mean horrible. Like, do not open this door. I trusted my instincts and noped out. Later, I told my dad about it, and he said that he had gotten that same feeling of dread when he went to open the same door. So yeah, creepy, right? Story number 1, Brownie in the Bush. I used to work second shift security at a large college campus. Second shift meant that by the time I arrived, the sun had already set, and the place became a little eerie once the campus was dark. I had to do rounds of walking through the designated area I was assigned to, but on weeknights, it was quiet. I could usually catch a few moments of reading time. The building was surrounded by a small patch of woods, and there was a walking path that wound its way through the trees. I enjoyed doing the rounds because it allowed me to get some fresh air, so I wouldn't fall asleep, especially in the first few weeks of that job because my internal circadian rhythm was adjusting to being awake at night. However, I had to admit that the woods could be a little spooky at times, especially when the moon was full and cast an eerie glow on everything. I remember one particular night I had been reading about the Fae and people's encounters with them. I had always been fascinated by stories of the little folk and found myself drawn into their world of magic and mystery that surrounded them. I never thought I might encounter one. At this time, I was also into metaphysical studies and learning to see with your third eye. Again, I was curious, but I didn't think I would actually achieve any success in this. Oh, how wrong I was. It was getting late and my shift was winding down. As I was walking out of the automatic door and into the night, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was following me. This isn't a great feeling when you're trained as a security person to keep your eyes and ears open. However, I didn't actually see anyone. I quickened my pace, my heart pounding in my chest. I reached my car and fumbled with the keys, trying to get the door open as quickly as possible. That's when I heard it. A high-pitched giggle that seemed to come from the bushes just a few feet away. I turned and looked to see the bush shake and saw what looked like an all-brown, muddied-looking tiny person, only about 12 inches tall, run into the bush. It was spindly and disproportionate, its arms and legs being longer than its short little torso. I couldn't really tell if it was male or female. I froze, my hand on the door handle, unsure of what to do. The giggle came again, louder this time, and I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. Without thinking, I jumped into my car and started the engine. I peeled out of the parking lot, my heart racing and my mind in a frenzy. Looking back, I'm not sure what I saw that night. Maybe it was just my imagination playing tricks on me, or maybe it was something else entirely, but I don't think so. One thing's for sure, I'll never forget that feeling of being followed by something that I couldn't explain. The laughter sounded ethereal, and wasn't quite real, like otherworldly. No one can convince me otherwise that there are still mysteries in this world, still things we can't see or comprehend. And maybe the world is a more magical and mysterious place than we give it credit for. Story number 1. Whales in the forest? My brother and I have spent countless hours in the woods together. From building forts and BMX tracks to LARPing and hunting, we have done it all. Since 2016, we've traveled across the US exploring caves, canyons, cliff diving, mountain biking, camping, and hunting various animals such as whitetail, mule deer, and wild boar whenever we get the time off. I think it's important to add that there's nothing to fear or anything I wouldn't do when I have my brother by my side. However, this time was different, and we both felt it. We've had many adventures and stories to tell, but this experience left a lingering stain on my memory. In 2019, we were both in our mid-20s, and it was probably my 5th time hunting in the area, but the first time I brought my brother along. It's a vast public forest with a few country roads that are basically 2 tracks that stretch for miles. We made the trip up in my truck. We had 3 tents in total, 1 for each of us, and another to change in and keep our gear in. Without being long-winded, we drove through the trails for quite a while, then set up camp a couple of miles from the truck. Essentially, we were in the middle of nowhere, with the nearest main road probably 8 to 10 miles away. We arrived late at night, set up camp, and quickly fell asleep after the long trip. The next day we spent scouting and tracking, and then returned to camp for the night. We cooked, ate, had some beers, and bullshitted around. It was going great. The night was still young, but we had a long day and decided to turn in early because we had more planned for the next day and wanted to reserve our energy. Everything up until this point was normal. Most of the night was fine, but then in the early hours, I was suddenly awakened by something smacking my tent, and I heard my brother's voice whisper my name. I knew something was wrong, so I called back to him, and he immediately unzipped my tent and made his way inside. I could tell he was upset. When I asked him what was wrong, he grabbed my shoulder and told me, "Shh." The sun hadn't risen yet, so I think it was around 4:30 a.m. We sat in my tent, and what we heard still confuses me to this day. Soft at first, then getting louder. I can only explain it as whale sounds. Different tones of extremely loud noises, and I could feel these reverberating throughout my body. It would come and go, but there would only be a few seconds of silence in between the sounds. It went from high-pitched squeals and everything in between to very low sounds that had literal ground-shaking reverb. Regrettably, I didn't think to grab my phone or record anything that was going on because I was dumbstruck and terrified. What I was hearing didn't seem real, and in that moment, I was paralyzed. The sound went on until daylight started to break. I believe it might have been an hour, but I'm not really sure. Neither of us spoke. The next part won't make sense, and it's hard to describe. I had a feeling like energy around me, almost like my body was covered in white noise. It wasn't even minutes after the sound stopped that it started to rain, and it ended up being one of the craziest thunderstorms I've ever encountered while camping. Another oddity about the rainstorm is the forecast didn't predict or account for any rain the days we were going to be there for the trip. When it stopped raining, we got out of our tents and were further shocked to find that all the stakes for the gear tents were completely ripped out of the ground. My brother and I's tents had stakes ripped up as well. Those things were the long, heavy metal ones, and they'd been driven into the ground with an axe. It would have taken some insane force to unearth them. My brother dismisses the incident and won't even talk about it. He passes it off as machinery being dragged, but we were out in the middle of nowhere. That makes no sense at all. We both shared the same feeling of fear and dread. Despite how terrifying this experience was, I am glad my brother was there. Otherwise, I might have thought I was having a psychotic break, thinking I was losing my mind. Story number 2. Obsessed with the darkness. I've never shared this story, but I feel I need to. I also need to quantify that I'm not religious, and I've never believed in supernatural beings, let alone seen one, until that night. It was a strange encounter that has haunted me for years. I was pregnant. This conception was the result of an unexpected and, in the moment, unwanted pregnancy. However, I had come to terms with the situation and was trying to move on with my life. But then things started to occur that would cause me to question reality entirely and make an already difficult situation worse. I was 8 months along. It was in the middle of the night, and I suddenly woke up to see a figure hovering over me. It was the shape of a person, but it was a black, shadowy figure, almost like it absorbed all the colors in the room. It gave off a feeling of emptiness, like it was sucking the life out of everything around it, including me. I looked at it in horror as it gazed down at my belly. I was frozen with fear, and all I could do was repeat, "God help me," over and over again. Suddenly, the figure grabbed me by the neck and lifted me up. I hit my head on the top bunk I was sleeping on. I could feel its icy grip tightening around my throat. This demon or entity brought me closer to its face, which was a swirling mass of darkness, and screamed into my head, "There is no hope for him." The last thing I remember was feeling the coldness of its touch as I struggled to breathe. At first, I thought it was just a strange dream brought on by my pregnancy, but there were marks on my body which told a different story. Later that morning, as I was showering, I felt achy and tired. I noticed a knot on my head and tender spots on my neck. When I got out and looked in the mirror, I saw bruises there. I kept the incident to myself, afraid that no one would believe me, or worse, that they would think I was crazy and lock me up. I was young and vulnerable, and I didn't know who to turn to. After a few more months, I gave birth to a beautiful baby boy. He was the light of my life, and I dedicated my entire existence to raising him. But as he grew older, I noticed that he was becoming increasingly obsessed with the idea of being a villain. While most boys worshipped the heroes in stories, he would say things like, "I want to be like him," and point to the villain in the movie he was watching. When he played with other boys, he loved being the bad guy, and it worried me. He seemed obsessed with the morbid and evil side of society. I was immensely concerned, and I didn't know how to stop it. For a while, I tried to ignore the signs, hoping that it was just a phase that he would grow out of, but the more I watched him, the more I realized that something was wrong. I was a gentle and soft-spoken woman, and I remember I wasn't particularly religious, but my son's obsession with demons and devils and killers was starting to frighten me. As I thought about my son's strange behavior, my mind drifted back to the night I met that entity. I felt certain it was some sort of demon. I wasn't sure, but I knew one thing: it was real. I didn't know if God was real or not, but I knew that the devil was. The memories of that night flooded back, and I knew I had to tell someone. I confided in a close friend, and she encouraged me to seek help. Together, we found a therapist who specialized in trauma and spiritual healing. Along with my friend and therapist, we got my son into counseling. I also connected with a higher power. Maybe not the Christian concept of God, but I had to believe in something larger than myself being out there and that it could help my son. I prayed for him with more energy than I can describe. It was a long and difficult journey, but I was finally able to confront my fears and come to terms with what had happened to me. As for my son, I believe my prayers and the counseling helped because his obsession with demons began to slowly ebb until it was gone. but my experience with that demon or devil or whatever it was changed me forever. I may not be religious, but I know that there are forces in this world that are beyond our understanding, and I will never forget the night that I came face to face with one of them. Story number 2. I'm never alone. I'm just a 20-year-old guy, but I've been having these sightings that I can't explain. I know it sounds crazy, but I can only put it down to these creatures being fey in origin. I've read stories about them, and so many things add up. I'm scared because I don't know if they're attracted to me, or if I can somehow see through the veil they hide behind. The sightings usually last only a few seconds before they disappear. I don't suffer from any mental illness, and the creatures I've seen are not something I could make up. I'm just not that creative. There are some creatures that I've seen many times. I live in an area surrounded by forest, and one autumn day, while hiking in the woods behind my backyard, I saw a little creature. It was wearing a dark cloak with collars that seemed to be made of fallen leaves, and its head looked like the skull of a bird. I don't think it showed itself intentionally because it started running as soon as it saw me, and then it was gone. What freaks me out about this memory is that it was a windless day, and for a few seconds I saw it, the leaves were moving as it ran away. I saw this creature a second time, or at least I think it was the same one. Out of curiosity, I hiked there again and the next day, but this time it was really huge, and I felt like it was warning me about its territory. So I turned back, went home, and avoided that area if possible. My second sighting is pretty common. I see these little people who seem like a mix between some kind of rodent and a human walking in my house. They never seem hostile, maybe just grumpy? I believe that they're brownies or some other type of house spirit. I'm not sure what to make of these sightings. It scares me to think that there might be something out there watching me, following me, or even worse, trying to communicate with me. I don't know what they want, and I don't know if I should be afraid or not. I wish I could talk to somebody who knows more about this and help me understand what's going on. Until then, I'll just try to avoid them as much as possible. I don't want to provoke them or cause any harm, and I certainly don't want to find out what happens if I do. It's a scary thought. But even when I'm seemingly all alone, I'm not alone, and that terrifies me. Story number 2. A Rake by the Lake. Let me tell you, Pennsylvania has some creepy shit in the woods there. I came from a wealthy family, and every year, my parents would ship me off to some remote location for a month while they were on their own luxurious vacations. I never wanted to go to summer camp. I was a bookish kid and never really fit in with the other girls. They would always tease me for reading instead of gossiping or painting their nails. The camp was located in a dense forest miles away from civilization. It was an old rustic camp that looked like it had been around for decades. The cabins were made of wood with creaky floors and small windows that let in just enough light to see. The lake was murky and dark, with a small dock that jutted out into the water. There were canoes and kayaks lined up along the shore, waiting to be taken out for a paddle. It was that quintessential summer camp you'd see in 80s horror movies. Yeah, not kidding. The days were also filled with typical activities like hiking, swimming, arts and crafts. I was never good at any of them, but I went along with it because it was expected of me. I spent most of my time in the library reading books by the dim light of a lamp. It was my only refuge from the constant noise and chatter of the other girls. I didn't even care that the library didn't have that many books. One night, my cabin mates convinced me to sneak out with them to go skinny dipping in the lake. I didn't want to go, but I didn't have many friends and didn't want to be left out. We tiptoed out of our cabin, trying to be as quiet as possible. The air was thick with the scent of pine needles and the sound of crickets. As we got closer to the lake, we heard noises of someone near the lakeside by the canoes. We thought for sure another cabin of girls had the same idea. However, as we got closer, we saw a creature lurking in the shadows. It was tall and slender, and it seemed like it had razor-sharp claws and glowing eyes. We froze in terror, unsure what to do next. The creature started to move towards us, and we knew we had to run. We sprinted back to our cabin, our hearts pounding in our chests. We slammed the door shut behind us, panting and gasping for breath. From that night on, we never left the safety of our cabin after dark. We slept with the lights on and barricaded the door with furniture. We didn't tell anybody about what we had seen, afraid they would think we were crazy. Looking back on it now, I realize maybe it was a trick of the light or some wild animal that we mistook for something more sinister. I can't lie, I am a sucker for the paranormal, and I believe we encountered something that night. I think it could have been a pen crawler or even a rake. I'm unsure. Now that I'm an adult, I do look back on those summers with a mixture of nostalgia and dread. It was a time of growth and exploration, but also loneliness and isolation. I am grateful for the memories, but I'm also glad that I never have to go back to that creepy old camp ever again. Story number 3, Haunted Penitentiary. My boyfriend and I were excited to go on a ghost tour of the old Missouri State Penitentiary. We love spooky stuff and thought it would be fun. At first, as we walked through the halls listening to stories of past inmates and paranormal experiences, we didn't feel anything out of the ordinary. I didn't expect to. I wasn't really a believer. But when we entered the gas chamber, things got weird. One girl in our group suddenly had a full-on asthma attack and began gasping for air. She was clutching her chest and saying she couldn't breathe. It was a scary moment, and we all tried to help her as best we could. As we left the chamber, everyone noticed the girl had these awful red scratch marks all over her arms. We were stunned and didn't know what to make of it. Was it an elaborate act or something more sinister? Wasn't sure if I believed in ghosts before we went, but afterwards, I questioned it a bit more. If it was an act, she was a damn good actress. Story number 3, Something on the Roof. I can't believe what's been happening since my husband and I moved into this new apartment. I've been practicing witchcraft for over 10 years now, and decided to delve into the world of the Fae last year. I've always been hopeful I'd encounter them and offer them gifts, but they never showed up until we moved here. So I started baking all kinds of solstice goodies, leaving bits out for the Fae to enjoy. I never said anything directly, just left the treats out with the intention of them being for the Fae folk. It's been about a week now, and I keep seeing colorful light specks flying past me and small figures standing in the kitchen and hallway. Just glimpses, though. I was okay with all of this until things started going missing. I had a set of earrings that were very near and dear to me. Now one of them is gone. Maybe I could chalk it up to losing one, but I don't think so. Then my husband and I both remember seeing the spare car keys in a specific spot on the counter, and now they're just gone. We've looked everywhere and we cannot find them. My husband jokingly said, "Maybe you should ask your Fae friends not to steal stuff?" Has anyone else experienced this before? I didn't want this mischievous interaction, and yet they're still taking things from me. I guess be careful what you wish for? Story number 3, Stargazing. There's not a whole lot that happened, but it was quite a spectacle. My family and I were stargazing one night when I was about 10 years old. We lived in a village on a hill in farm country, and the nearest neighbor was a mile down the road in the opposite direction. We were sitting on a blanket beside the gravel driveway that made a full ring around the house. The house was nearly 80 years old, so it could have just been a haunting. All of a sudden, I saw a glare of red in my right-hand periphery. For a second, I thought it was a small fire in the field, until I turned directly at the light streaming from between the man-made tree line break. Well, fires don't burn in unwavering circles, and they don't tend to burn in 4 separate spots either. It was 2 pairs, one taller by a solid foot, or else one was crouching? But it was dark, and I couldn't make out any silhouettes. They didn't move. I nudged my brother and told him to look. We were roughly 30 yards away from the lights. They were as big as dinner plates. That's what really unnerved me, because nothing natural has eyes that can glow like that, and they never shifted for like 10 seconds. But it was stunning. Then we heard Dad say, "Hey, everybody get back in the house, now." And we picked up our blankets and ran. Dad didn't get closer to investigate either, so we'll never know if it was more solid or ethereal. But he knew something was wrong too. We also saw condor-like birds a few times roosting, but the beaks were black, and the face was kind of buried in the neck, so there was something odd with the wildlife out there, to say the least. A family friend about 10 miles off also once spotted an actual black wolf roaming their land, but there's only supposed to be coyotes in Nebraska. Story number 4, Targeted by a Demon. Honestly, my story doesn't seem that bad, but just listen to the end. I was only 13 at the time, and it was terrifying. For context, I live in a small village full of old houses and forests, very rural. I have a younger brother, and on this particular night, my parents had gone out to meet someone, leaving me to babysit my 7-year-old brother. It was around 9 p.m., winter, snowing, and pitch black outside. I remember tucking my brother into his bed and going downstairs to grab a few snacks. While chatting with my girlfriend on the phone, I heard a loud noise from outside. I got up, went to the window to check it out, but saw nothing, so I ignored it. It was a very distinct noise. A few minutes later, there was another loud noise, even closer to the window. I got scared, so I called my mom to ask when they would be home. Unfortunately, she didn't answer, so I called my dad, but he didn't pick up either. Feeling scared, I went to check on my brother, who was still sound asleep. After checking the windows and doors, I finally fell asleep myself. Suddenly, I woke up at 1 a.m. by the sound of my phone ringing, showing an unknown number. I answered, but no one spoke. After saying hello a few times, I grew tired and decided to hang up. But then I heard a low, growling sound on the other end. That's when this goddamn loud noise started to happen again, but this time it came from inside the house. Since my brother and I shared the same room, I woke him up and told him to be quiet, and we hid in the closet. I locked the door quietly, and we sat with my baseball bat in hand. For a few minutes, I was terrified because I heard footsteps coming down the hallway. I texted my mom, begging her to come home. She saw my message and replied with, "What's going on?" My hands were shaking so bad, all I could reply was, "Intruder." The loud noise sounded off again, and this time it was right outside our room. Both my brother and I were crying. At that moment, I screamed out, "Police are on their way!" And everything went completely silent. I hugged my brother, and we stood there until we heard police sirens. My parents had called the police, and when they arrived, they found that the front door was open. Nothing was missing from the house except for the fact that there were scratch marks on the walls. Oddly enough, it would have seemed like a human intruder, but the creepiest part, there were no footsteps outside or around the house. It had been snowing, so there should have been evidence of an intruder. Unfortunately, my experience didn't end there. A week later, I had to go to the hospital because of a terrible nosebleed, night terrors, headaches, and an awful ringing in my ears. I went into an unexplainable depression, and my friends and family said my personality changed. We later found more scratch marks outside our house near the window that I had checked. It was impossible for a human to have made them. Maybe an animal at best? After that night, my family decided to install a security system in our house. It gave us a sense of safety and protection, but it didn't seem to help my unexplained medical symptoms. As things got worse, I started to believe that my plight was not just medical. I found information online teaching me how to use sage smoke and prayers to expunge the dark entity that I believed had attached to me that night. I'm not sure if it was a demon or spiritual parasite. I'm still unsure, but at least it's gone now. Those 2 years were hell, and I couldn't erase the trauma of that terrifying experience. I still have nightmares about it, and my brother has become more anxious and cautious than ever before. We never found out who or what caused those scratches, and I guess we'll never know. Story number 4. The Gnome. Everyone always talks about the Mothman incident in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, but there's other stuff that's happened, and I had my own personal experience. My aunt lives there, and I visit her over the summer sometimes. At this time, I was 18. She's an older woman, so she let me borrow her car whenever. I had a few friends from previous summers I'd visited. One late night, when my friends and I decided to take a drive through the area, we made our way down winding roads. I was in a great mood. We were all laughing and joking. Suddenly, we saw something dart across the road in front of us. It was small and quick, but it looked like nothing I had ever seen before. One of my friends was quick to brush it off as a raccoon or a stray cat, but I wasn't the only one in the group who disagreed. My other 2 girlfriends said that it was definitely bipedal, like a small human toddler. But this would have been like a little person toddler, which made no sense because it was the middle of nowhere. Dear God, I hope it wasn't a toddler, because that would have been a terrifying toddler. I didn't think so though, because it was dressed strange and moving strange. Dare I say it, but it was like a garden gnome. Just not as neat and clean as the little lawn statues. No, this little guy was dirty, like he'd been grubbing around in the dirt. We were all pretty hyped about it, arguing and whatnot, but once we got back to my friends and started watching the movie, I forgot about the incident. A few days later, my friend and I decided to go on a hike in the nearby woods. Ironically, we were on a trail close to the gnome sighting. As I walked deeper into the forest, I heard a strange noise, like clicking, but not like any animal I've ever heard. This time, I was only with one other friend, and it happened to be the skeptical one. We rounded the bend, and I saw it again. This time, I was on my own because if my friend saw it, she wasn't going to fess up. I thought that would be the end of it, but no, things got stranger. As the weeks went on, the Fae, if that's what you want to call it, continued to make their presence known. From what I knew about the Fae, you had to be careful. Fairies were known to be mischievous, and I heard stories of people who had angered them and suffered the consequences. I wasn't sure why this one in particular kept making little appearances to me in particular. It was always unnerving when I saw him. The 2 sightings had been in the forest area, and then it seemed like he started following me. One morning I woke up to find my aunt's cat food and water dish on the porch had been turned over, and it looked like someone had been taking their finger and drawing circles in the spilled food and water. Maybe I could say it was a raccoon, but here's the thing. The food and water are kept on an entirely closed-in porch. Animals can't get in. Not even the cat. She can't get out. The screens were tightly fixed with no holes whatsoever, so it had to have come through the door. But there's another caveat. We always keep the screen door locked, and when we checked it, it was unlocked. That doesn't make sense because my aunt is notorious about home security. She has a nightly routine she hasn't deviated from since I can remember. There's no way she left her screen door unlocked. To say that we were both unnerved is an understatement. My aunt is old enough to remember the Mothman incident, and even though I've tried to ask her about it, she won't talk about it. So I don't really feel I can bring up the gnome sightings with her. I saw it a few more times that summer, or at least I thought so. It was always just within my periphery, kind of making me feel like I was going crazy. Then, at the end of my time there, I went back home, and I was a little on edge thinking this creature would just show up in my backyard, but luckily that didn't happen. I guess they don't really like suburbia? Who knows? I did go back the summer after next and was wondering if I'd see it again, but that time, I didn't see anything out of the ordinary. I haven't really ever experienced anything else to date, so I'm starting to wonder if Point Pleasant is just a hotspot for the paranormal. Story number 4. The Man in the Forest. This is the only time I've had a threatening skin-to-skin contact experience. On June of 2019, a friend and I had planned a camping trip with our girlfriends. On the day of the trip, we packed our things in the car, set the address in the GPS, and hit the road. After 3 hours of driving and 45 minutes of hearing my friend and his girlfriend argue, we finally arrived at the camping site. As we began unloading our things, my friend's girlfriend revealed she had brought an ounce of some 420 if you get my drift, and other goodies. With the knowledge of our stash, we searched for a secluded spot to camp, which we found just before sundown. After setting up camp, we decided to eat hot dogs and indulge in our stash. While we were building a campfire to light the area, we ran out of wood, and I went to gather some more. After picking up sticks for about 2 minutes, I felt someone grab my wrist. I looked up to see a man with a blank expression and long fingernails digging into my wrist while trying to grab my other one. I turned my head to avoid seeing his distorted face and screamed for help. My friends heard me and came running. They started shouting my name, and he released my wrist. I turned to look, and the man had simply vanished. I ran back to my friends, meeting them halfway. They were confused, but I was like, we need to leave now. They didn't question me. We quickly packed up our belongings and left. As we were walking back, I explained what had happened, and my friends were equally scared. I know you're probably thinking it was a hallucination, but I took a picture of my wrist immediately after the incident because there was a bruise there. It was a terrifying experience, and I still have so many questions. I wonder who the man was and what his intentions were. How did he just disappear? Was he even real? I would have thought it to be a substance hallucination, but the bruise on my wrist would contradict that. I hate to say it, but I'll likely never know.